Hello, welcome back again. So today I think we're up to day 3, and we're going to start kind of a new theme with the Python coding camp. And the theme we're going to start is graphics. So graphics will be fun. You'll like graphics. We're also going to kind of show you how to connect Scratch knowledge to Python knowledge. And I think that's where a lot of people are coming from, in that they've studied Scratch, they kind of know about Scratch, and now they're trying to move into Python. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to make something in Scratch first called HelloButton, and then we're going to build that same thing in Python, and we're going to kind of see how it compares. Now I'm just going to tell you the biggest problem with today. Today the biggest problem is going to be slowness of REPL when it comes to graphics. So if it is something you can handle, you've got good patience, then super duper. If it's not something you can handle, you might have to make a different choice. All right, so let's go ahead and see what it is we're doing today. So this is the HelloButton program we're doing. So HelloButton, you can click on increment, and it just increments a counter. So we're going to figure out how to make numbers in Scratch. It's going to take just a little bit to figure out how to do. That'll be good though. You can also reset it, and in addition to increment, you can also decrement, so you can go up and down with the counter. Now I will say Scratch doesn't do negative numbers well, and so after 0, if you hit decrement again, it actually just goes to 99, which isn't bad, right? It's not terrible. I would rather it said -1, but it just kind of works how it works. So that's the program we're going to make in Scratch, and then we're going to come into Python and REPL again, and we're going to use a package called Replit Play. Replit Play we'll learn about some as we go, but essentially it lets you do some similar things to Scratch, right? So here I've got an increment, and then a decrement, and a reset, just like we saw in Scratch, but this time it's all done. You can see the Python code over here, and then this one does handle negative numbers just fine. You can also see that we're going to borrow some things from Scratch. So Scratch has a really good image editor, and so we're going to do the image creation stuff in Scratch, and then we're going to bring it over into Python. So let's go ahead and get started. So open up a new tab and go to Scratch first. If you don't have a Scratch account, you should make one, right? So like anybody with an interest in coding should have a Scratch account. So just go fix it if you don't have a Scratch account. You'll have to put in an email address and things like that. And I think we're ready to go. So the first thing I want to do in Scratch, I'm assuming you're kind of familiar with the environment already. If you're not, what I really would recommend you do is there's a Scratch camp that's associated with connecting with code. Go take it, right, if you don't know Scratch. But I'm assuming that you're familiar with Scratch. So the first thing I want to do with Scratch is, if you look at my solution here, there's no cats in it, right? So I'm going to get rid of my cat sprite, so he's gone. And instead I need sprites for these buttons and then these numbers up here. So these buttons, I just drew them. And so whenever you want a sprite that you just draw, you just need to click on choose a sprite, hover over choose a sprite, and then select paint. So normally we just click on this circle and we just select something from the library, or we upload an image, but these ones we're just going to draw. So I'm just going to click on paint. And what I want to do is I want to create a couple buttons, and so I kind of like drag out my button. It could be however big you want it. You can always resize it later. And you can decide the color that you want. We're going to make 3 buttons: an increment, a decrement, and a reset. And so you can pick your color. Mine defaulted to kind of like a purple. I don't have any problems with purple, but maybe I feel like making a yellow button today, just whatever I feel like. And I'm going to put some text on here that just says increment. Now my text is the same color as my rectangle, so I just need to fix that, so I'll just make it black. And getting good with the Scratch image editor can be important. I will say that the Python doesn't have anything like the image editor that Scratch has. The Scratch image editor is actually really, really good, and it's something that makes it powerful. So here's my increment button. I usually just draw it whatever size over here, and then I just change the size over here as I need, right? So let's just say I made it 20. Oops, that's too small. How about 40? 40 is probably good enough. Maybe 50 would be even better. Cool. And so I've got an increment button. All right, 40's going to be better. You could also change things like the outline thickness. So you can see that if I make it too small, then whenever I shrink it, it went away over there. So I've got a button that I'm happy enough with, and it says increment, and it's got an outline. If you don't work with the Scratch editor as quickly as me, just pause the video. No big deal. But we need an increment button, and I'm going to go ahead and rename this. I'll just call it ink button. And then I need to make a decrement button. Now, instead of starting from scratch, what I'm going to do, is I'm going to duplicate this one. And so now I've got a duplicate of it. And this duplicate I want to call my decrement button. And then my decrement button, I like colors, so I'm going to make it a different color. So to change the color, you have to select the rectangle, so make sure you click on the select tool and then the rectangle, and then you can change it to a different color. How about a fuchsia? Great. Again, however long you need to get good with the editor, take that time. I mean, it's better for you to just kind of play until you're comfortable with it, until you can make these buttons, right? And then I want another button that's going to say reset. I feel like reset has to be red, right? So I'm going to select my rectangle again. I could probably make it quite a bit smaller as well. And then I'm going to change it to be, I don't know, kind of like a red color. And if I wanted, you could even, if it's a dark enough red, you could even make the text on it white, just whatever floats your boat. Cool, and it looks like I've got 3 pretty good buttons in here. I'm just going to kind of sort of center them a little bit. And then above that, I want to have the number show up here. That's going to take just a little bit to get that number worked out. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to add a variable. So I'm just going to make a variable called counter. And I'm just going to display it for now, right? So eventually we want to have the numbers up here, but I just went ahead and made a variable called counter, and I'm displaying it for now. Another thing that I choose to do is I choose to go ahead and put a background on here. You can put a background on here or not, just whatever you feel like, right? So I'm going to put a little blue sky background on mine. You can put a different background on yours, of course. Cool. All right, going OCD with my buttons and trying to lay them out neatly, but I think they're good enough. So to make a program that updates the counter, we'll worry about the buttons in a little bit. It's really not too bad. Essentially what you need to do is you need to know when a sprite is clicked. So I'll zoom in some on it here. So I clicked on the increment button, and whenever he's clicked, what I want him to do is I want him to change the counter by 1. And you can actually test that just with those 2 lines of code. And then the decrement button here, whenever I click him, I want him to change the counter by -1. And so I can click on him. Interestingly, I don't even need the green flag because nothing happens when green flag clicks. But it looks like he's working out well. And then reset. Reset I need to rename, so I'm going to call this my reset button. His code is similar. When you click him, he's going to modify the variable, but he's just going to set it to 0. So if I click decrement, you can see it's going down. Increment, it's going up. Reset brings it to 0. Now, the one problem with Scratch is it makes things really, really easy to do, but it only lets you do specific things, right? So if I want to make this counter bigger, I can right-click on it here and I can say large readout, but that's really the biggest that I can make the variable like this. So Scratch is really, really impressive, but it does limit you to what it does well. And that's, I'd say, the biggest difference between Scratch and Python. Python, you'll find, is harder to do simple things, to be honest. But Python, there's so much more you can do, right? Like you don't even know until you do it. So admittedly, we're going to be like making the same thing in Python that we made in Scratch, which is going to make it look like Python terrible, right? It's like it's a bunch of work to do the same thing. But really what makes Python powerful is that you can do 1,000,000 times more different things. All right, you just take my word on it. Let's see if we can get some numbers in here. So here's what I'm going to do on this one. This one I will just click on this circle to choose from the library. And what I want to do is I want to add a number. So I'll just start typing the word number. And I'm going to add the number 1. And so the idea is that this is going to be my tens digit. And it starts with the number 1, and if I wanted to I can make it bigger, of course, so I can make it like, I don't know, 200%. And what I need to do to make different digits in here is I need to add more costumes. So starting with the number 1, this is going to be a little tedious. I'm going to add, and I'll just type NU, the number 2, so I've got costume 1, costume 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch the costume as the number changes. So just bear with me. You'll figure it out. You do have to add 1, 2, 3 all the way up to 9 and then 0 after that. I'm just going to do it quickly. If you need to pause the video to do the same thing, that's fine. If you make a goof, it's very easy to fix. You just have to delete it and kind of like start again, right? So sometimes I forget numbers. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then I need to add 0 as the 10th one, right? Cool, so I'm happy with that. Oops, I did not mean to do that. And so now I want to make a copy of the tens digit, so I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to call this one, of course, the ones digit. And I'm going to kind of organize the tens digit and the ones digit as appropriate. Cool. And so Scratch, in order to make these things like change when the number changes, we're going to have to broadcast an event that says like update the number. And so for all these buttons, they're going to change the variable and then they're going to broadcast an event. So they're going to broadcast, we'll just call it, I don't know, update display number. You could put spaces in these. I chose to do camel case just because that's what some functions do, where each word is uppercased. Again, just kind of blitzing through this, but you can always pause it as you need. So I want all the buttons to change the variable and then broadcast that event. And then the numbers are gonna, when I receive update display number, I'm gonna do stuff. So the tens digit is going to have some code in there, and then also the ones digit is going to have some code in there. It doesn't matter which one we write first. We could write either. Let's do the ones digit. So when I receive this, let's go ahead and do the simplest thing we can. We're going to switch costume to, and we're going to switch to the counter. So if we run it now, we can see that the ones digit is doing pretty good, right? So it switches to the counter. Then this is interesting, what happens for 10. It actually works out fine, right? So there's a little bit of logic in here where I'm switching to costume 16, and it's actually working out just fine. So the ones digit is good to go. So that's kind of neat that it's all it really takes to make the ones digit happen. Tens digit is going to be similar but a little trickier. So the tens digit is going to be switch to costume. And it's going to be based on this counter again. But what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to divide it by 10, right? So it's going to be counter divided by 10. Then there's a little thing that might surprise you here. Counter divided by 10, maybe we'll just see it happen. What happens when you get to 6, right? So will it display 0 when you get to 6, or will it round up to 1? So we'll just go ahead and take a look here. So if I increment 4, now the real question is what happens to the tens digit when I get to 5? And the answer is that it rounded, right? So 5 divided by 10 is 0.5, and it rounded it up. We actually don't want to round it up. We want to do what's called the floor of that number. There's a function in Scratch for that. This ABS actually has a ton of like special functions like inside of it. We want the one that's called floor. So floor, which means like round down, floor of counter divided by 10, that's what we want. So now if counter is 9 even, it's going to do 9 divided by 10, which is 0.9, and then the floor means round down, will be 0. So let's go ahead and give it a go. So I can increment up, and then as soon as I go to 10, it rolls over, which is cool. And we've got a cool little counter. Now I will say that decrement should also work. It should decrement down, reset should work, but negative numbers won't really display right. Not going to fix it, right? That's just how Scratch works. So cool, we've got a fun little counter program in Scratch here. If you wanted to, you could hide the counter variable so you can see how it's displayed up there, and you could hide it there. By the way, whenever I make a Scratch program, I usually click on share. It'll only let you share it if you've validated your email address. But the fun thing about this is you can just copy this URL and you can just send it to somebody, which is kind of fun, and they can play your HelloButton counter game. Great. So now we want to do the same thing in Python. So the Scratch one is done, and so now it's going to be Python time. So we're going to head over to REPL again. So you can go to REPL.com, and we're going to create a new REPL. Now, this step is different. Normally we just click on Python right here. The problem with Python is it doesn't have a graphics window for you. What you want is the Pygame version of it. It's still Python. It's just that Pygame, this starting code, has graphics capabilities, right? So instead of Python, I picked Pygame. Make sure you do that. If you say Python, you're just going to have to start over, right? Because you have to start with Pygame. And this is going to be my hello button. So I'm going to go and create this REPL. So how do we start, right? So what I want to do to start is I want to introduce you to a new API. So what is an API? An API is code that somebody else wrote that you want. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to import the Replit Play library. So maybe I can zoom in a little here. So there's a library called Replit Play. We could go look it up. So Replit Play. If you just do a search on the internet, you'll find a couple of different URLs. This is the Replit Play, so Replit/Play, a library on GitHub. Could talk a lot about GitHub and how GitHub is useful, but this tells you like how to use the library. One thing that I do sometimes whenever I'm like learning something is I just try their example. So see if you can find this URL, and its first thing on here is an example of so just like it's like a cat thing that you click. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on copy, and so I copied all this text, and I'm just going to paste it right in here. Jumbo. Sure. And so now I got to zoom out a little bit. And so I'm trying to quickly get to where we're running it, but I have no idea what all this code says, right? And so I'm just going to click on play. And now here's the time where patience is a virtue, right? So you can see I kind of sat back in my chair a little bit. And so the pros and cons of REPL. So the pro of REPL, so it's running, it's doing its thing. You can see its CPU here is like pushing the limit, right? So the pros and cons of REPL, that's quite distracting, I'm going to hide that, is that there's almost no setup, right? So you go to REPL and it just It just has Python installed to where you can just worry about writing code. It's got a play button in here where you can just use the Python interpreter on things, and it's very like easy to get going with it. The downside, the reason people don't use online IDEs is that they're slow, right? Especially when it comes to graphics things. And so this thing is going to take a little while before it actually runs, right? And what it's doing is it's downloading this Replit Play library, and it's making it to where I can use it. Now the good news is that the super slow one only happens the first time you run something in Replit. It does get better after that. While it's doing its thing, let's just talk about Replit a little bit. Replit Play a little bit. So the first thing you have to do is you have to import the library. So we've talked about imports in previous days, so that's not surprising. And then the way this particular library works is you kind of write all your code. You kind of write all your code that uses this library, and then at the bottom you say this play.start program. And so that's kind of the system. And by the way, what this one does is it's like a little cat, and you're trying to click it, right? So you got to be super fast to click the cat. I'm gonna eventually win here. And the fun thing about code is if it's too hard, you can adjust the code, right? So my cat is way too fast, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for where in the code it looks like he's showing up for 0.4 seconds. I'm just going to change that real quick to 2 seconds, and I'm going to run it again. And so now he's going to show for 2 seconds, and then he'll move. So now it should be much easier for me to click on him. Where is he at? Oh, by the way, you can make this window a little bigger if you wanted. So there I clicked it and it says you won. So cool. So I got my victory there. All right, so what are we hoping to do? Well, we're hoping to keep this top line, import play. We might keep lines like this, but then the middle we're going to kind of like get rid of. So if we look at what this code is doing, it's more complex, right? So this top line, what it's doing is it's creating a sprite. So it's very similar to like creating sprites down here, but of course we're doing it in code. It's creating a sprite of type text, so that's fine. And then a sprite has lots of properties that you can set on it. You can set like where it's starting X's, where it's starting Y's, things like that. Its font size, whatever you want. So let's go ahead and make some changes to this. Let's just make it say count equals 0. And instead of cat, we'll call it counter. Maybe we'll call it message, actually. That might be a better name because it's going to get confusing if we call it counter. And then this chunk of stuff I'm going to delete, but I want to talk about it just briefly before I delete it. You can see that this is a repeat forever block. So this is very similar in Scratch. If I were to drag over a repeat forever block, that's kind of what that would do. And you can see that it just kind of is a loop that just runs forever. And so this is how the cat was like moving around. So I'm going to delete that one. This next one is when you click the cat, what does it do? And so it would switch the words to BU1. So that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just going to delete it here. But do keep in mind this syntax. We're going to have to worry about clicks at some point. So I took it down to a very simple file here. I could even delete my comment if I wanted. And if I were to run it right now, it would try to put my count on the screen. Mine kind of like put it in the lower left. I think it's because it doesn't know how big my window is. I think I could try to center it up a little bit better here, so that looks pretty good. So you can make this window a little bigger if you'd like. Oh, I'm zoomed in funny. That's what's also weird. Cool. So it should actually be in the very center of the screen. Great. And so let's see about adding some buttons. And so what we want to do is we want to add some buttons. In Scratch, we had these cool like yellow and fuchsia and red buttons. I like those, right? So I want to use those in my program. So how do I get a button from Scratch into, I keep going to the wrong tab, into Replit Play. So how are we gonna do that? Well, we're gonna export the image. So to export an image from scratch, you can right click on it and you can say export. Before you click that, you can export files from scratch in a couple different file formats. This is currently using their vector graphics editor, and if you export it from here, it's going to give you a file with the extension SVG. That will not work very well in a lot of other programs. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to click on this button that says Convert to Bitmap. And then we're going to click on right click and we're going to say Export. And what that's going to do is that's going to let us download the file to our computer. You can put it wherever you want. And this one was, what was this? This was the ink button. I'll just call it ink button. And you can see that, that I've already practiced this, and you can see that it downloaded this ink button thing. And then what I want to do is I want to, I can just drag that up and put it into to Replit. So now I've got access to the ink button. If you if you're not using Chrome and you don't have this cool little like just drag it up from here thing, you'll just have to find where it's at in your system, and you'll have to click on upload file. And then you'll have to find where it's at on your computer and upload the file. But I was able to just drag it, and so that was super easy. So the next question is, how do I get this button to show up on my screen? So I'm just going to call it ink button equals play dot. And so sometimes the IDE is really good, and it'll like tell me how to create sprites. I was hoping that it would autocomplete. Ah, there it goes. Mine did eventually help me. It took a little while. So you can create different types of sprites. You can create text, which is what we did before. You can create lines. You can create circles. You can create boxes. This one's going to be a new sprite that's going to be based on an image. So I'm going to select this this option here. So new image. Whenever you construct a sprite, you have to give it an image. So you have to say what the image is equal to, and then you can choose to set its X, its Y, its size, its angle, and its transparency. So here's how this works. So I'm going to say image equals, and I'm going to say ink button .png. And then right now it's going to be at the exact same spot as the text, so I'm going to set its Y to be like, I don't know, -50 or something, right? And so if I run it now, it should create two different sprites. One is the message, which is text, and the other is the increment button. It worked, but the increment button is a little on the huge side, and so it's way too big. So we can set other properties on it. So for example, we can set the size. So you can see that we've got X we could set, Y we could set size, and it is so big I'm probably going to go with like 25%. I could also move it over in the X. Maybe we'll just say X is equal to, I don't know, 200. And so you can kind of see how you can build up these programs. So we've got the counter here, and we've got an increment button over here, and things are going pretty good. If you had problems with one of these steps, there's obviously things that can go wrong. Try to see what the code is telling you. So just to make an error, I'm going to like take out a T in like ink button, and then when I run it, it should not work, right? And the error messages pop up down here, and it says no file ink button PNG found in this directory, right? And so you've got to get better at debugging to try to figure out what is wrong. And this console area down here is what tells you if there's an error. And then your game, of course, shows up here. Cool. See if you can add the reset button and the decrement button on your own. Also see if you can get this counter to like show up a little bit higher. See if you can kind of pattern match a few of those things. So pause the video. I will do them with you, but see what you can make of it. All right, I'll help you out. So the first thing, I'm going to move up the text here. I'm just going to set the Y on this to be 100. And by the way, the grid system works just like it does in Scratch. I'll just kind of show it to you in Scratch here really quick. Scratch, you can just watch this, you don't have to do this. Scratch uses a grid system where Y is 180 at the top, negative 180 at the bottom, 0, 0 in the middle, and then the X goes from 240 to negative 240. So that's kind of the flow there. And Replit uses a similar structure. So up 100 from the middle, so here's the middle, and it goes up 100. All right, so I want to add the reset button and the decrement button. So the first thing I do is I go to the decrement button. I convert it to a bitmap because that'll change it to a PNG file. And then I export, I'll just call this deck button. And of course I practiced this once, so it asked me to replace it. And then I just drag it, just because Chrome makes it nice and easy, drag it from here to there. And then I'll go ahead and copy this line, and I'll make a deck button. And it's going to be based on deck button. And its X is going to be negative 200. And so now I should hopefully have an ink button and a deck button on here, which is cool. Notice how fast it runs that time. The first time it was super slow, but after that it's got faster, thank goodness. So let's go ahead and get our reset button. So reset button, I want a PNG, so I've got to do this convert to bitmap. Then I can right click and say export, and this is going to be my reset button. And of course I practiced this once, and so now I'm going to add it. And as you can see, I've been coding for a lot of years, and I type super fast, right? The reason I allow myself to just type super fast like this is because you're watching a video. If I do this live, I go way slower. But for videos, I found it's typically best just to plow through it, and then let people pause it as they see fit. So I'm hopefully going to have an increment button, a decrement button, and a reset button. I think they look pretty good. By the way, it's also way easier with Python to get these buttons to lay out nicely. If you remember in Scratch, I spent forever trying to get this thing just the right height that I wanted. And so with Python, you do things numerically, so you just type it in, right? So you get exactly the right size you want. Let's go ahead and add that background as well. That's been fun. So same trick on that. So I just click on the background over here. I say convert to bitmap so that I get the right file type. And then I right click and I say export. So this is my, I'm just going to call it background. And then in Replit I can add that file. And I'll just go ahead and add the background just to make sure. I'm going to put it at the top, right? So I'm going to say background equals background.png. And just to try it, I'm going to try not putting on any special arguments, right? So if you don't put on an X or a Y, it defaults to something. Oh, that looks lovely. Oh, that's weird. Reset has clear in the middle. That was not expected. That's fine though. You could also tweak things as you see fit, right? So maybe with the background on here, I want my buttons lower or something like that. Not sure if that was a good plan or not. But you can tweak it to your heart's content until you're happy with things. So I'm just going to move my buttons down into the grass there. My reset button looks terrible. If you wanted to fix that, you could. Essentially, it made it transparent on me, which was no good. I kind of wanted it to be. Oh, you know what I could do? I could fill it in with black or something maybe. It still kind of looks terrible, but so this is my reset button. I would recommend to you that you just let it go, right? So I have trouble letting things go, but I recommend to you that you just let it go. There, I brought it in black, but it still doesn't look great. Cool. So time to call it done. If you wanted to keep tweaking things around, you could. I guess this count in the other program, I just displayed a number, so I could just change that to a number. I could also make the font huge on it, right? Yeah, that looks pretty good. Oh, I could go even huger. What would a 400 font look like? Oops, I didn't click run. So yeah, that looks good. All right, so I think that I'm happy with like my layout. And so now what I need to do is I need to be able to click on these buttons and figure out how to do that. Now there was a nice example that we had in here with like clicking on the cat earlier, but I deleted it, right? So we're gonna have to figure out how to add that back. We could go look at it here. You can see it's got this like weird @ symbol and then like when clicked. You could also just go read this API and kind of like how to use it, right? So there's like different sprite commands that you can do. Yikes, there's all kinds of interesting things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look for the word clicked, and I can see that there's this when clicked that I can use. Here's kind of an example. So I could copy it from here, or I could copy it from the initial example. It doesn't matter, but it does make you faster when you code to kind of like copy things. I think that just for consistency, I'm going to copy it from the top here. So I had this cat when clicked. So I'm going to copy this into here. And so you can see that before I had something called cat, but now I've got things like ink button. So ink button dot when clicked means run this function. The function name here can be anything you want. So I'm just going to call it ink clicked. And the code that's within here, I'm going to switch to just print something that says you clicked ink, or you clicked the increment button. So here's how APIs work. So we're using their API. Whenever you use an API, you have to figure out how it works. And it takes time to figure out APIs. But the syntax for this one is that you say @ an @ sign is something I'm not going to explain. It's what's called an annotation. And so you're annotating this function here so that it's a special function. And it's special because it's going to just run whenever you click on increment. So right now, so watch the bottom here. When I click on the increment button, it says you click the increment button. Cool. And if you click it again, it does that. Let's go ahead and see if we can make all 3 buttons respond to clicks. So I'm going to copy it a couple times, right? So I copy a lot. And I'm going to have the ink button and the deck button and the reset button. And then I'm going to make them all say different things. So I'm going to make this one say decrement, and then this one say reset. So again, typed it just very, very quickly, so you can pause it and you can make yours match. This variable here has to match the variable there. So notice how they have to match. This thing here has to match what I typed there. So this is the name of the sprite. So if you want to refer to it in your code, you have to use that name. And then same with the reset button there. So those things have to match. This thing here can actually be whatever you want. So like if I just type gibberish letters, it would work just as well, right? I don't like typing gibberish letters, but you can see that the thing here doesn't matter. So it says you click reset, decrement, increment. Since I don't like the gibberish, I'm going to type reset click. So I just wanted you to know what mattered and what didn't. And so this is cool. So we've got, these are called callbacks. So whenever I click on these, it performs an action. This is very, very, very similar to the code that we had here. And it says, when this sprite is clicked, change this variable and broadcast that. So very, very similar to when it's clicked. So over here, what do we do? We changed the counter by 1. So we're going to need to make a variable. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say message.counter equals 0. And so this is now my variable. And so whenever they click on increment, I'm going to say message.counter equals message.counter plus one more. By the way, indentations are important in Python. You can see that I copied code from here, which was using 4 spaces. But over here, it keeps trying to use 2. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch all of my code to be only 2 spaces. And so you can see space, space. That puts it inside of this function, right? Cool, so that changed the message counter. Now we're going to have to change the things that the user sees, and we're going to set the words to the counter. So this one changes the variable, which is very similar to this change counter by 1. And then this one updates the screen, which is very similar to how this one broadcasts the update display number. It's actually easier in Python, to be honest. So if I say increment, you can see that the number is actually changing up there, which is cool. All right, now we're cooking with gas. So I want to do a very similar task for decrement and a very similar task for reset. Decrement, the only thing that changes is that this +1 becomes a -1. That's the exact same as what Scratch did, so change by 1, and then decrement was changed by -1. And then reset isn't a change, reset is a set to 0. So over here we just want to say message counter equals, and we're just going to say it equals 0. So it just kind of like blows it away, right? Cool, let's try it again. We might have just finished this thing, right? So I run this, I hit increment. Hello. It was a little laggy there for a minute. All right, so I hit increment, and it does the increments. I hit reset, and it does a reset. And then I hit decrement. Oh, it actually does negative numbers, which is cool. So if I were to go up to 10, and then I were to decrement down, it would go down, which is cool. And if I reset, that works out fine too. The other fun thing about Python is in Scratch, we're going to only show 2 digits, right? That's kind of the end of it. But in Scratch, I mean, you can show as many digits as you want, right? So let's just say I started with the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I hit increment, you can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. My font's a little big, right? But it doesn't matter how big the number is in Scratch, which I think is kind of cool. I'd rather it started at a smaller number. Let's maybe start it at 10, just for giggles. Great, so you can play with this to your heart's content. If you would like to continue to try things, that'd be fine. I think I'm going to start at 0. I think that was better, actually. You can also, if you wanted, comment out these lines. To comment things out, you just type a pound in front of it, if you remember that. There's also a shortcut key if you hold down Control and hit / to quickly comment them out. But you can see how graphics things in Python are very doable. And I think it's pretty cool, right? And so we've got this cool little counter on here. If you would like a challenge to where you would like to do more, there's definitely more that you could do. Let's see if we could find a thing you could do. So I'll go ahead and run this. This is this is not in Replit, but it's kind of the idea. If you wanted a challenge for today, see if you could do this. See if you could make something that instead of increment, decrement, and reset buttons, it was coins, right? And then these coins allowed you to like have a change calculator. So it's kind of a fun little challenge that you could do, and you could click on the dollar bill and it'd add dollars. But you can see how there's some fun, interesting things that you could do with the same concept, but counting money. I didn't put a reset button on here. I wish I'd put a reset button on there. By the way, there's a few lines of code in here that are just a little tricky. So you can see that I'm using the play library. At the bottom of the play library, I've got this play start program. The only thing that's tricky about this is I wanted to show you this is I've got a counter called sense, like so message.sense, And what I've done is I've divided it by 100, so you can see that I obviously have divided by 100. And then here's a little bit of trickiness. If you want to show 2 decimal points, put that on there. So I wanted to show you that line of code just in case you do try this challenge. I don't think there's any way that you'd easily come up with the syntax for using formatted print strings like that. But it's kind of a neat thing if you wanted to try that as a challenge for today. Cool. And so I think that's it. So the goals were to play with graphics in Python, and we use this play library to make it a lot easier. And you can see how we made a counter program in Scratch, and then we implemented that same counter program in Python. Thanks for joining us today. We'll continue to learn more about Python, and we'll kind of like tie it to Scratch as we go, which will be fun. See you next time. Bye.